Hello everyone, I'm Irina and I'm here in London with Anthony and we are going to interview today David from TradeIX.
Hello.
Hi David.
Hi, Irina. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So David is an experienced fintech entrepreneur and expert in the area of distributed ledger technology, global trade and supply chain finance, corporate finance, and transaction banking. As a veteran in blockchain and distributed ledger technology industry, he pioneered the technology application in the enterprise with a focus on global trade and finance, supply chain finance, and transaction banking. David has spent his entire career working alongside the world-leading banks, corporate technology companies, industry bodies, and government designing, implementing, and scaling world-class technology platforms, ecosystems, and networks. And today he is an industry-wide thought leader and frequent speaker on such topics. And so I'm running the session and Anthony's asking questions from the audience. So please put your questions in the chat. And after like 15 minutes, we have questions from the audience and then we go back to the interview and have more interview. And in the end, we have more questions from the audience. So Anthony, David and me are in London, and how are you guys out there? Just drop please in the chat where you based so we can know where our audience is. So David, how are you today? And if you could kind of like start where, like if you could tell us how you started and how like TradeIX started.
Absolutely. Well, I'm doing fantastic today. It's another day in our virtual world that we live in 2020. It's great to be able to do fun events like this. I'm just doing them in person, but this is great. So thanks you for the introduction. I'll take some time to tell you about Marco Polo, how it started, and where it is today. So Marco Polo was founded in 2017 by a group of leading financial institutions and two technology companies, ourselves, TradeIX, alongside R3, who you all know, obviously. It started as a project in the very early days of Corda, where the banks had looked at how to leverage Corda's distributed ledger technology to streamline and automate what are typically very paper-based, manual, and risky processes. They approached TradeX because of our experience in the industry and our technical capabilities. And then from there on out, Marco Polo was born. Fast forward to today, a little over 3 years later, we're now the fastest and largest growing blockchain-based trade and working capital finance network in the world. Yeah, and we have quite a number of members from all over the globe, from the Americas, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Asia Pacific, and a wide number of very good technology partners as well.
Mm-hmm. So what problems are you trying to solve at TradeX?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. Before we really get into the meat of the content, I think it's important to describe, first of all, what is trade and supply chain finance? And then secondly, what's wrong with it? Like, why are so many institutions and organizations focusing so much time and effort on rewiring this industry with blockchain technology? So first, what is trade and supply chain finance? So trade finance is a very broad term. It describes generally the financial instruments and products that are used by companies, often offered to those companies by banks, to facilitate international trade and commerce. And within trade finance, that family of products and services, there's a lot of other different subcategories, if you will. And the subcategory that Marco Polo is focused on is called supply chain finance, which is a family of, again, products and techniques and practices that are used by businesses, banks, and other types of financial institutions to manage the capital invested in the supply chains and reduce risk for parties involved in those global supply chains. So when you think about a global supply chain, it involves many different stakeholders, buyers, suppliers, banks, insurance companies, logistics providers, customs agents, document couriers, freight forwarders. And all of these parties need to coordinate and to get goods from one part of the world to another and to get the payment from the buyer to the supplier. And all of those different events in a supply chain, whether it's the issuance of a purchase order, the pre-shipment inspection of goods, the dispatch and shipment of goods, issuance of invoices, approvals of invoices, all of these events are triggers for either financing, risk mitigation, or payment. So supply chain finance is a very event-driven type of solution that offers financing, risk mitigation, or payment depending on the product at different points in the global supply chain. Just very briefly, why is it time now to apply new technologies to this industry? Well, it's never been more important. The world has become increasingly global. Supply chains have become increasingly complex. The amount of trade finance annually is around $8 trillion. So despite the increasing size and importance of trade and supply chain finance, there's no other way to say it other than the financial IT systems that support global trade today are very antiquated, they're siloed, manually intensive, and that injects a significant amount of cost, risk, and friction into every part of the process for every party involved. Just a few highlights for how bad this problem actually is, because you may not believe it if you're not involved in this industry. 90% of invoices are still based in paper. The financial instruments that we use to support global trade today are still largely based in paper and haven't changed really for several hundred years. One of the reasons why we call the network Marco Polo, because it's actually Marco Polo, the Italian explorer, whose journey to the east kicked off east-west trade between China and Europe. And when trading parties started doing cross-border commerce, they needed a way to establish trust that when one party delivers the goods, the other will pay. And that financial instrument, the letter of credit, is still one of the most widely used instruments in global trade today. And most of them are based entirely in paper. So it's a massive industry that's very important, but has a lot of problems with the IT systems that support it.
Mm-hmm. That's very impressive. I was reading on your website that the way people used to trade hasn't changed even from 3000 BC in Babylon, and even like in Roman Empire, it was like still the same papers and the same tablets. So yeah, it seems like very it needs some improvements.
Yeah, they have promissory notes, which are in essence the same instruments we use today to settle trillions of dollars of trade transactions. The same concept, a promise to pay a certain amount in a certain currency on or before a certain date. They have cuneiform tablets from 500 BC that they found that are essentially work the same way that trade instruments work today. So yeah, things have not changed in a long time.
Wow. What does distributed ledger fit into this picture?
Very good question. So when you look at Marco Polo, the network topology, if you will, what we have at the top is we have our participants. So the key stakeholders in a global supply chain, the buyers, the suppliers, the insurers, the logistics companies, the funders. They interact with Marco Polo through an enterprise software platform that provides workflow automation and a great amount of transparency to the users, allowing them to really automate end-to-end these trade transactions within their own organizations, but also with their counterparties. All of these participants, the way that they exchange information and data, the way that they transfer ownership of financial assets, the way that they make funding requests and funding responses, the way that they configure the rules and workflow of a given transaction, all occurs over the Corda distributed ledger network. So we have all of these participants running a distributed platform. Each participant is its own node and has its own unique legal identity and its own dedicated software platform that connects to that Corda node. And the distributed ledger maintains states, contracts, and flows for the financial supply chain. So invoices, purchase orders, payment undertakings, financing requests, responses, for the informational supply chain. So on Corda, we maintain information about that participant's unique ID, about their entity information, which we call their digital passport, which is the way that they can prove they are who they say they are, and other reputational and risk-related information. And then finally, the physical supply chain. So all of the data associated with the movement of physical goods from one place to another, we also track that and exchange that information via the Corda distributed ledger. So in this instance, Corda, and I'll go into this later on in the interview, but it gives us three things that are very important to rewiring the multi-trillion-dollar industry that's global trade. One is it gives us a standard messaging protocol, so standard way in which machines that represent participants can exchange messages, whether that be financial information or metadata, whatever it may be. Second, it gives us a shared expression for business logic. So the way that we actually encode the rules that will govern any type of state change or transaction, we encapsulate those in the form of a contract. The market would call them smart contracts. Many people call them different things. In Corda world, it's your contract. And so that's a very smart, intelligent way how to actually build the business logic, the rules and the workflow of a given transaction onto the ledger itself. And then the last thing, but not least, is it allows to come to consensus about what the single source of truth is. And that's a very difficult thing to do in trade and supply chain finance today. And the inability to do so injects a tremendous amount of cost and risk and actually leads to massive examples of fraud where billions and billions of dollars are lost. So on the basis of those three core capabilities that Corda gives us, we're allowed to offer a much smarter, more secure way of trading.
Oh, wow. So this is like super impressive. David, if you could compare like how long does it take to make one transaction between like buyers and sellers using like manual way and on Marco Polo?
Yeah, I mean, if you compare, so we have multiple products on our network. One of the products called Payment Commitment is a digital risk mitigation tool. So an example is if I'm an exporter, a German auto manufacturer, and I want to export, millions of dollars worth of automobiles to China, I'm going to want some guarantees that if I do ship these millions of dollars of automobiles to China, that I will be in fact paid. Today, most of that process occurs on paper, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and there's a lot of risk involved in that, and it can take weeks. The process can take weeks. With the Marco Polo Payment Commitment product, we're able to offer that same risk mitigation where the seller, the exporter, is guaranteed payment by the importer and the importer's bank if they do everything correctly. Except they can do it digitally, and instead of taking weeks, it can take days or hours. It just depends on how the transaction's configured. So it reduces tremendously, orders of magnitude, the amount of manual work and time associated with the traditional way of doing things.
And usually it takes in like when there is manual transaction around like 30 or 100 people, right, to make the transaction. And if this like German car manufacturer is in Marco Polo, then this number of actors in the transaction reduces as well, right? And number of interactions as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to any large global bank, to their trade finance departments, you will find rows and rows of thousands of individual people whose job it is to physically check and match paper documents, a purchase order to an invoice, a bill of lading, and a packing list, to match these manually. So inbox, outbox, thousands and thousands of people. In total, the industry, tens of thousands of people do this on a daily basis. Now that we deal in digital data, the ability to match one data object to another data object can happen in near real time and without human intervention. Whereas today, it's very much a paper-based manual process. So in terms of the reliance on actual manual intervention, we're going from manual intervention being required for all cases to a world where manual intervention should only be required for edge conditions and exceptions. That removes a whole lot of required work out of the workflow.
Wow. Anthony, is there any questions from the audience?
So I haven't seen any questions yet, but everything that's been discussed so far is extremely interesting, and I would invite any attendees or participants to chime in. Just put your question in the chat, and then I'll forward it to Irina and David. If it doesn't reach this particular point in time, we're going to have more questions along the way. So if there's any questions, feel free to type it in. We'll give you like maybe 10 seconds here. Otherwise, I might chime in with my own question because I've kind of got one lingering in my head here.
Okay. Okay.
But let's give the group 10 more seconds. Does anybody have a question out there out of all our attendees? We have a chat box on WebEx, so just type it in. Anything goes. There's no hold bars. I've kind of like told everybody that there might be some grilling here, so feel free to just ask anything under the sun. Okay, so nobody's asking a question, so I think I will ask a question. What sort of like kind of initiative process to be a part of the Marco Polo network is there? Like, what are we talking about in terms of how long it takes to reach time to value? When you decide, I want to be a part of DLT, to that part where you're starting to reap these rewards, which are obviously humongous.
Yeah, so the journey can be different depending on what the participant would want to do and really how deep integration work they want to undertake before they start this. But the process to join Marco Polo, you can reach out to us either through our website or you can send me a message. My contact information will probably be distributed with this information. Or if you already know someone involved in Marco Polo, please reach out through one of the account managers or our marketing folks that we have. The process is very simple. You start an engagement. Most institutions begin with pilots. So it's a fairly straightforward legal arrangement. You come as a bank or as a corporate, you bring some of your counterparties and you do some testing. Usually it's not so intensive. It's really just initially just, how does it work? Doing some demos, doing some end-to-end flows. And usually then we see participants step into what we call our pre-production or our path to production, where they've made the decision to go ahead. And then we have a project plan depending on the type of client, the size of the client, and what they want to do, where we map out the integration and enablement paths. So all IT and security sign-offs, training, the actual performing the integration and the integration testing itself. And then once you've completed that, it's green light. You can go into production at any time. We are in production and would like to think that the process is as painless as it possibly can be. Considering we're dealing with large multinational corporations and heavily regulated financial institutions.
Nice. Okay, we actually hooked in one of our audience members with this discussion on deciding to be a part of the Marco Polo network. And the question from Raja is, what prompted Marco Polo to choose Corda DLT network? Why not another private blockchain? For our audience out there, you have options like Hyperledger Fabric, or you have Ethereum Enterprise. There's other versions of private blockchains. So number one question is, why Corda DLT? And following and adjacent to that question is there any special use case which made Corda stick out? So I'll let David go for this one.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and it brings me back to a few years ago when we started this thing. I filled up a passport in 2 years flying around the world talking about a lot about this exact question right here. So I'm always happy to go down that line. So our company TradeIX actually was founded and started its path on Hyperledger Fabric. And we actually went into production. It's public. I can say who it was Standard Chartered Bank, DHL, and AIG as an insurance provider. And it was really cool orchestration. However, an infamous day in TradeIX history, one of our other executives got a call from your very own Todd McDonald and said, "Hey, would you guys consider looking at Corda and building on Corda?" And we did. We did a fairly deep analysis of Corda versus Hyperledger versus the other solutions in the market, like Quorum or public chain Ethereum, and it became very clear that Corda was the right way to go. It's built on proven enterprise technologies that millions of developers around the world are comfortable with and have been tested in the enterprise over decades. The design itself is been built from the ground up in cooperation with financial services companies and financial institutions themselves. So the characteristics of how, for example, the peer-to-peer messaging works, how consensus is achieved, the entire flow construct of being able to automate multi-party transactions, the privacy that Corda gives you and maintains, on and on. These are all things that really attracted us to Corda. And when you look at other solutions, Fabric was struggling with privacy. They tried to address it through channeling, which introduced, in our world, in trade finance, when you have thousands of different participants and millions of different transactions, the channeling methodology, I think we calculated, would have led to us having to support 270 million channels or something like that. And at that point in time, we should just build it on a centralized database. So yeah, we did a deep evaluation. We started on another and we moved to Corda. And I really think Corda's unique selling proposition in trade and supply chains has been very well established. You really see most of the trade and supply chain finance initiatives on blockchain now going to Corda, and very rarely do we even have the question posed to us from our prospects or existing clients why we've chosen to go with Corda. They know why.
Awesome. Yeah. So that was the last question for now, and I'm sure we'll have more as we go along. So back to you, Irina.
Thank you, Anthony. So, David, you mentioned as an example of car manufacturer, what kind of other transactions are processed on your on Monte Carlo or Marco Polo?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So today we have two products and a third in development. The first product, as I mentioned, is the payment commitment product, and that's designed, as I said earlier, as a risk mitigation solution that allows an increased level of transparency and trust, and to be able to establish that trust and that commitment to pay in a much more streamlined and digital and simple fashion. The second product is called Receivables Discounting. And what this product is, it involves the exporter who has commercial invoices, basically assets that represent a buyer's promise to pay the supplier in a certain currency on or before a certain date. And a lot of times these suppliers, these exporters, don't want to wait 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days to be paid. They need cash now to be able to fund their growth, to be able to fund their operations, to meet payroll, to run machines, to source fuel and support raw materials. They can't afford and don't want to wait that full payment term. So the invoice, what it becomes is a financial asset that they leverage to obtain financing. So these invoices become digital assets on the blockchain, on Corda, and the exporter or the supplier, both are synonymous, sells these digital assets that represent invoices to a network of banks and non-bank funders. So in doing so, the supplier, the exporter, one, increases its cash flow. It gets cash in the door now, as opposed to 90 days to fund its ongoing operations. Two, it reduces its counterparty risk, because now that it's sold that asset, it no longer has to worry if the buyer is going to pay or not. That's the financial institution's worry, who will be repaid by the buyer on the original due date. So that's the second product. The third product we're building is called Supplier Pay, which is really focused on the buyer and how it makes payments to its suppliers, its tens of thousands of suppliers all around the world, in a very seamless and streamlined fashion. And also, as an added bonus, allows those suppliers in its supply chain to elect early payment, to sell their invoices to a group of banks or non-bank funders so that they have the option to be paid early whenever they need to be or whenever they want to be, which is a really cool solution. So that supplier pay solution is really focused on a large buyer and its global supply chain. And how do you pay those suppliers and how do you get liquidity into that supply chain so the financiers can get cash when they need it and when they want it?
Mm-hmm. So which of these products are most excited for you?
All of them. The thing that gets me most excited is not necessarily the apps that we're building now, it's the ecosystem that we're building. TradeIX itself is today the primary developer and the business network operator for Marco Polo. However, in the future, we want to open up this ecosystem, open up this network so that other third parties can come to the network and build and commercialize and scale solutions on Marco Polo, which ultimately leads to added value for everyone, including ourselves. So the thing that excites me most is when we get to that phase, when we actually have a real open ecosystem where there's lots of different technology companies, and you have a dynamic similar to what you see in the mobile space, where certain platforms like Android or iOS have led to the ability for these providers to support a massive ecosystem. And in that regard, you see business models that weren't possible before that ecosystem existed become possible, like an Airbnb, like an Uber, or you know, any other type of mobile platforms. That's what excites me the most.
Wow. So you mentioned that Marco Polo is the largest supply chain finance network. How large is it? How many participants do you have?
Yeah, so we have, let me go back to that slide just to make sure my number people are joining every single day. We've got over 30 financial institutions at various stages of engagement, some in production, some just starting to engage, and everything in between. 7 technology partners: Microsoft, Accenture, Polestar, R3, obviously, Oracle, MasterCard, and Tech Mahindra. And then around 20 plus corporate clients who, again, are engaged in varying levels of the process. Some are in production, some are really just getting started and just doing testing and everywhere in between. So a nice critical mass with a good geographic distribution globally.
So you told us about the benefits of DLT in this case. How would you address trade finance gap?
That's a good question. So for those of you who don't know, the trade finance gap refers to the approximately $1.5 trillion that's needed by small and medium-sized enterprises to fund their global trade, but is not available to them. The reasons why these businesses aren't able to avail of trade finance, don't have access to trade finance, are many, but typically it's one, because institutions don't view them as creditworthy or can't establish their creditworthiness because they don't have confidence in the collateral that the business is posting to obtain financing, and or they just don't have the data to actually analyze the financial performance. And this is the second reason, but usually both are present. Typically, it's because these small businesses are in developing economies, emerging markets where financial institutions turn around the rule of law and secured transaction law and their ability to recover losses in case of a bankruptcy or an insolvency event. And then the third, the big one, is KYC and compliance reasons. So banks, more than ever, are concerned about their exposure to potential fines and sanctions associated with doing business with companies that they shouldn't be doing business with, according to either regional, country, or global regulatory regimes. So how do you address that? It's a massive issue. These businesses are the lifeblood of these economies, and they need trade finance. So one, there's a legal aspect that's required to address this trade finance gap. The introduction of real secure transaction law and associated collateral registries, legal harmonization that allows lenders to be comfortable with the positions that they take in those markets. The second part, which is what we focus on, is technology. So when you have more access to verifiable trade data, you have an easier way to connect to these businesses and receive that data and underwrite against that data. And then you have the visibility and transparency into the actual underlying trade flows so that you know this is a real transaction, this is a real business, this is the amount of volume that they're doing. I can get comfortable with financing this transaction. And then once you're comfortable actually onboarding them, servicing them, managing the financing payments, the maturing payments, to be able to do that all in an automated fashion means that there's a real business case, that the return on investment is very strong for the institution. So if you address, with access to more data, more automated processes, and more transparency, you start to eliminate these barriers that have led to this trade finance gap, which is only going to get worse considering the current economic environment and the impact that that's having on financial institutions and businesses globally, not just in developing economies.
Anthony, do you have any questions from the audience? You are on mute, Anthony.
Sorry, everybody, I got a little bit excited before I took the mute off. So there's one question in particular, which is really nice, but I just wanted to jump in because there was another question which is very relevant that came through the Q&A, and that was directed at us at R3. Do you just work with large corporates or startups too? And I thought this was really interesting because we have a huge venture development program right now, which is working with startups. And specifically, I think, David, for TradeIX, you weren't always humongous, right? There was sort of a time when you would kind of be considered a startup. Is that kind of true?
Oh, 100%. When I joined, we had 15 or 20 people. I mean, we were small enough when we first started that we didn't really have an office. Our office in London was just a little WeWork, little tiny thing. So we actually sent people to work out of R3's London office. So we had people like basically seconded to R3 working at your office when we were first getting started out because we didn't have enough room. So yeah, we started as a little baby company, and today we've got 150 people and offices around the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always nice to see one of those success stories and kind of see how quickly this can happen, the transformation. It's like you start with an idea and then you hit the ground running. And with DLT space and the opportunities exploding these days, you can really make something out of it very, very quickly. Which leads me to the next audience question, which is very interesting. Have we induced IoT sensors in Marco Polo Network? So I guess to explain that, I guess there'd be a lot of opportunity to have automated injection of properties or of specific statuses during the pipeline of trade finance. And I guess this person is asking, has that happened yet? And do you have plans to maybe do something that in the future?
So it hasn't happened yet, but we absolutely have plans and we have the capabilities to do so. So let me explain. The platform itself has a very rich set of APIs, and one of the API sets is around the physical supply chain. So events, when did the ship leave, where is it, when did it arrive, and everything in between. So it's a very flexible data model that allows us to capture a lot of data from the physical supply chain and trigger events within the platform based on those inputs. An example that's similar to IoT and IoT could fit straight into the same model is our partnership with Polestar, which provides geo-tracking for maritime vessels. So what we have is actually a feed from Polestar, who via satellite is tracking ships as they move around the world. So trade transactions that involve a container of goods on a particular ship, you can actually track that ship as it moves through the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal or around the Horn of Africa, or leaving the port of Shanghai and arriving in Rotterdam. All of those events, all that satellite data is actually being streamed from Polestar into our platform and triggering financial transactions. So it's not a big stretch to imagine that, as opposed to a satellite, which I guess is a form of an Internet of Things device, if you could go so far. But instead of a satellite, it's a RFID tag on a container ship, or it's a temperature sensor inside a container full of shrimp to make sure that the cold chain is maintained, or what have you. So we have the capability. We haven't done it yet, but it's very exciting and definitely a big use case for us going forward.
David,
Sweet.
David, how is it like IoT fits into distributed ledger? How they both like work together?
Well, look, I think just at a high level, will eventually be entirely automated. You have self-driving container ships, self-driving trucks, drones acting as delivery vessels. You'll have, I bet you'll have self-driving planes at some point in time, cargo planes, smart warehouses, automated container loading and offloading. I mean, really, if you look, the supply chain today isn't that far off from being automated. And the actual Internet of Things devices, the connected world of machines that supports this automation needs a new type of fabric, if you will, or financial network to not only connect and allow all of these devices to orchestrate transactions, but to ensure that the integrity of those transactions is maintained. So when you look at a world where supply chains are run by machines, you need a network that allows these machines to connect and securely transact and be held to account if they behave badly, either through error, through maliciousness. So I think blockchain is the perfect type of technology to bring all of these IoT devices together and all the data that they throw off and put it into one nice flat technology infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anthony, is there any more questions?
Yes, we have another question. Is COVID having an impact on TradeIX? For example, today versus 9 months ago, sales speed of companies adopting and different markets, is that sort of being affected by the current climate?
Yeah, well, for one, I got the first gray hair in my beard ever, which was not a good sign to me. This year has been tough for everyone. I think personally we can all agree that we as human beings have had better years in the past. For our company, it's interesting. Basically, clients went one of two ways. The first way, which did happen, is the world's falling apart. We don't have time for this. We've been disrupted, so our engagement is slowing down. And obviously that's a negative, right? We don't like to see that, but we understand it. The second type of client, actually, COVID exposed the dire need for digitization in trade because all of these paper-based and manual processes that they depend on were not possible in lockdown. So actually the LC markets, the paper, the letters of credit, these instruments, the traditional instruments that are still largely paper-based, they depend on couriers, they depend on the document checkers, and none of them could work. They couldn't show up to the office. So these markets froze up. And that type of client, that has accelerated basically the need and the pace of digitization and adoption for us. So I'd say we have, our pipeline is not as big as it was, but the part of the pipeline that has been impacted by this COVID has basically accelerated their engagement. So it's been good and bad. In terms of work, luckily, distributed team from the beginning. We have an office in Dublin, London, and Singapore, and then we have 70 engineers in Odessa, in Ukraine. So we were already used to and knew how to work remotely. It obviously, it's not nice to not be able to go get a pint with your colleagues after work, or get on a whiteboard and map out some brainstorming. But we've managed.
Nice. There's another question here, which I think will kind of hit home some of the points you alluded to earlier in regards to why Marco Polo exists and what sort of problems it's solving. So the question is, how does Marco Polo help in commodity tracking in supply chain finance? So maybe if you could just quickly touch on some of the benefits a distributed ledger technology would provide in that aspect.
Yeah, so we definitely have a lot of demand from the commodities space, in particular for the risk mitigation tool. Commodities companies are big users of letters of credit because the transactions they conduct are massive. You're talking about $100 million or $50 million of pill-bearer iron ore from Northern Australia to China, right? These need secured by some type of financial instrument to protect against non-payment. Now, in terms of physically tracking commodities, like a barrel of oil has left the port of Shanghai and is on its way to whatever through the Suez Canal, or these aluminum ingots or whatever it is, have left Rotterdam and are on their way somewhere else. We don't track the actual physical commodities yet. It's something because of the nature of the technology we're using and the way we've architected the network and the platform, do have the capability to build out these use cases. Today, we're not tracking physical commodities. We're really focused on the payment risk mitigation, non-payment risk mitigation between the commodity companies themselves.
Okay, perfect. So there's a couple questions related to how to jump in on the action, but I think I'll pass it back to Armina, and then I'm going to address those and allow you to speak, David. At the end, I'm sure you'd like to let everybody know best moves forward for getting involved, but people are definitely nipping on your heels right now. They're really excited by this.
Good.
So, David, you already a bit covered the question, but you didn't cover the whole aspect of it. That I wanted to ask you about the state of digitalization of the global trade supply chain across the industry at the moment.
Yeah. So, two things: the state of digitalization. I boil it all the way down. Is one, we are not even close to being digital in the grand scheme of global trade and supply chains. I mean, as I said earlier, 90% of invoices, they estimate there's about 500 billion commercial invoices annually, and only tens of millions of those are actually I think 49 or 50 million they had said were electronically transmitted, and a lot of that is happening in Europe, where it's a very digital market, especially for e-invoicing. And when you transition over to emerging markets, maybe Southeast Asia, China, they're still almost entirely paper-based in their invoicing system. So we can't say with a straight face that this industry is digital. But what I can say is that there is more now than ever, a once-in-a-generation effort, if you can call it that, across the entire industry, all of the leading banks, all of the major industry bodies, all of the large trading companies themselves, the big importers, to rapidly and aggressively implement digital solutions in trade and supply chain and global supply chains, not just in trade finance and supply chain finance, but the entire market of global trade more broadly. So you have the bad, which is there are significant barriers and challenges to adoption, whether they're habitual, whether they're due to inertia and legacy, or whether they're actual hard barriers. Legally, certain jurisdictions still have requirements to do things in paper. A lot of jurisdictions don't represent electronic documents of title or don't accept electronic signatures. So there's an entire movement underway to address the legal barriers and the regulatory challenges specific to each jurisdiction. But then independently, there's a massive push on the technology side. You're seeing really all across the market a countless number of digitization initiatives popping up around the world in all types of different verticals and industry subsectors. So to summarize, the bad is we're not even close. The good is we are trying, and the awareness is there, and the investments are being made, and it seems to be just a matter of time. Now the question is no longer an if, it's a when, and who will actually be the ones driving the majority of its digitization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do you collaborate with other trade supply chains?
Yeah, so actually, Marco Polo itself was a founder of an initiative called the Universal Trade Network, which its stated mandate was to drive interoperability in the trade finance industry through the creation and adoption of digital standards. And that actually was handed over to the International Chamber of Commerce, the largest multilateral industry body for global commerce, and rebranded under the DSI, which is the Digital Standards Initiative. And through that initiative, there's broad collaboration across all the different platforms and networks out there, whether it's Contour or WeTrade or Singapore NTP or Easy Trade Connect, which is the Hong Kong trade finance platform, or Comgo, and all of the other various initiatives out there are at the table. Obviously, you know, our dialogue and our, you know, future plans for collaboration with Contour it's an obvious sort of next step. We're still a little bit too early to do anything about it, but there's definitely a desire and, you know, a willingness on both sides of Contour and Marco Polo to collaborate going forward, because we see each other as complementary. And in the other networks, it's really about how do we ensure that we just don't rebuild a bunch of digital islands that we set out to eliminate by replacing them with bigger islands, but islands nonetheless.
So how do you see this collaboration with the Contour?
Yeah, I think, look, when you look at Contour, they're looking at the digitization of letter of credit workflows. That's not something that we're looking at. We're taking a little bit of a different approach to risk mitigation and trade and supply chain finance. When you add our products and their product together, you really do have a nice full suite of trades and supply chain finance products. So in terms of collaboration with Contour, I think in the future, it's obviously interoperability through the Corda network, and then it's collaboration on solutioning. So potentially offering some joint solutions in the future. There's a lot of different options we can go down.
So basically to make bridges between those islands.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the nice things about Corda is that it's been built to be inherently interoperable between the various business networks. Technical barrier to overcome other than, you know, what you normally get when you're trying to connect two software systems.
Anthony, is there any more questions from the audience?
Yes, one of the audience members would like to know if Marco Polo is engaging with bank consortiums in Europe for possibly removing different currency impediments. Is there any sort of activity going on in terms of taking generic cryptocurrency and trading through it?
So not at the cash on ledger or payments being shifted from traditional rails to blockchain-based rails, whether that's a public blockchain or a private blockchain, cryptocurrency or a token, what you call it, a stable coin. We definitely have discussed that with our consortium, and it's something that they want us to have on our roadmap. We do, but it's not in the immediate or short-term sort of push. The reason being, the minute that we start touching the actual movement of funds, the number of signatures for the approval of the implementation of that in an organization goes from 10 to about 100. So just from the operational challenges that you impose on a network when you start actually being the store of value and the mover of money, it's not something we want to take on while we're still sort of incubating and seeding this network. But in the future, absolutely, whether it's Ripple, whether it's using Corda to create a stable coin or a store of value, or it's collaborating with any of the other, many number of initiatives out there focused on payments, it's something that we're open to and definitely want to do in the future when the time is right.
Nice. That makes sense. I'm going to hit you up with another zinger. So I knew these questions would get good at the end. So we had the crypto one, and now we're talking about, can you create some form of security with the shipping documents similar to a pledge on origin or a bill of lading? So electronic bills of lading, this is a hot one. Like, are you touching it? Are you planning to? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we plan to work in the e-bill of lading space. We've announced our partnership with Bolero earlier this year, which is the leading provider of electronic bills of lading and the related technologies to manage those. To your original question, could you create security based off of trade documents? Absolutely. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. That's one of the beauties of using Corda and a distributed ledger is that you can represent pretty much any type of data object as an asset, and slice and dice and sell and transfer ownership and price and do all the things you do with traditional financial assets. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I'm not exactly sure of the use case this individual is referring to around the securitization bill, but you definitely can, transform or dematerialize paper-based documents and make them into fungible digital financial assets. And that's a good example of the e-bill of lading being a document of title that's been dematerialized, digital, and then can be used either as collateral in a funding transaction or just as a data object as a part of the presentation required for obtaining the risk mitigation.
Right, right. And for the audience out there, I think it's kind of, you might be curious, why is David just saying like, oh, you can do it, right? Like you can do it. The thing with those new to Corda is that these sort of constraints or requirements are exceptionally easy. So it's very intuitive to do this. I recommend anybody in the audience to attend one of our developer boot camps just to get a touch and a feel of how simply these sort of requirements can be transitioned to code. But basically, TradeIX has put this all into this amazing package. And that's going to lead into my follow-up questions, which I alluded to earlier. We have some people in the audience that are really curious about opportunities related to working with TradeIX or getting involved. So one of the questions is, what sort of opportunities are available for companies from different regions to partner with you? Are there specific programs involved, et cetera?
Yeah, so our partner program right now is by invitation only. We're not fully open yet. That's just to keep things under control. We get so much inbound, we just can't handle it. But that doesn't mean that we can't partner with this individual or these individuals and their companies. I'd urge you all to, if you go to MarcoPolo.finance, you'll be able to see our career opportunities. You'll be able to get in touch with us, send us a mail, let us know who you are, who your organization is, what you'd like to do, and you'll be connected with the right individual in the organization to talk about either a role at the company or potential collaboration or a partnership. We're always open to those types of discussions, and it's really easy to get in touch with us. If you just go to our website, MarcoPolo.finance, you'll be able to get to anyone or anything you need from there.
Semi-related to that particular answer was the next question related to getting involved is, does Marco Polo work with smaller companies or startups to, I know you're invite only at the current moment, but at what point should one think about leveraging the solution, like size-wise or volume, trade requirements, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, is he asking about their company using Marco Polo?
I assume so. Let me clarify. The person that asked that, could you please just jump in and say, are you wanting to know about your particular company? Okay, no response yet, but I assume it's probably related to their particular company. Maybe they're in the trade finance sector.
Yeah, look, if you're interested in using Marco Polo or partnering up with Marco Polo, there are no size restrictions. As a potential customer, a user of Marco Polo, I think it works for large businesses, very large businesses. I think it also provides value to very small businesses who need working capital optimization or risk mitigation in a much more efficient and less costly means. In terms of partnership, we have typically tended to only work with larger technology partners to date, but that doesn't mean we're not willing to explore a potential collaboration. So again, to this individual, whether you want to use Marco Polo or partner with Marco Polo, just reach out to us via our website and we'll be in touch very soon.
Okay, Anthony, is there any more questions from the audience?
Are there any more questions? Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing them here. Oh, I found one from earlier though. How does your logistics differ from TradeLens or CargoX? David, are you familiar with those alternatives or?
Yeah, I am. So the difference is that our API would be something that would connect to a TradeLens or to a CargoX. The API itself is agnostic of which data provider you'd use. And the reason we've done that is because what we've run into is that every trade has a different logistics path. So they use a different provider, a different freight forwarder. There's a different place where this data is coming from. And what we found is we wanted to provide our users the flexibility to choose which data providers or which sources of logistics information they'd like to receive. So whether that's through a TradeLens, through a third-party aggregator, there's a lot of them out there similar to TradeLens, not on the blockchain, but similar, through Bolero or SDocs. That API set gives you a pretty agnostic way to connect with any third-party logistics source. So in terms of like how we as companies line up against one another, we don't play in TradeLens' space or CargoX's space, and they conversely don't play in ours. I think we have had a number of discussions with TradeLens. We haven't, I don't think, have talked to CargoX yet, but there was always a willingness and an openness to collaborate and partner up because they're complementary. They're a data provider, and we manage the financing transactions that leverage that data to provide financing or risk mitigation to the customers.
Excellent. Another question came in. Can Marco Polo be used in oil and gas domain? Is it capable of tracking carbon footprints?
We have, yeah, so yes, it can. And we've actually partnered with a company called Carbon Chain. I'd really urge you all to go Google them. They're doing some really cool stuff. I think, if I was an investor, I would invest in this company. They have the ability to, via basically a number of inputs about the route, vessel type, they're able to calculate wind based on wind and weather conditions and speed and load and a bunch of other things that I don't fully understand, but they're able to basically put it into this machine and out comes a carbon score, which basically gives you on a transaction by transaction basis the amount of carbon that this particular trade is going to produce. And we're partnering with them, and we're really looking and working with a lot of other players in the sustainability and the ESG space generally to leverage to support sustainable and environmentally friendly trade finance. It's a massive focus of our company right now. We have a whole team working on it. So the answer is yes, absolutely, and oil and gas, and yes, we are really focused on ESG and carbon tracking, and the convergence of carbon footprint with the actual financial activity is something very important, because a lot of the banks are being incentivized by regulators to offer preferential rates to companies that can prove that they're being sustainable or implementing environmentally friendly trade finance practices. And they just haven't been able to prove it, right? Because they don't have the data. But now that they do, the convergence of Marco Polo plus the ESG vertical is a really exciting opportunity for our company that we're focused really very, very relevant and top of mind to our whole company today.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, Irina, back to you. I think you have a surprise for us.
Thank you so much, David. So we have now like small surprise announcement of a new community tool, Cordaptor, that is developed by Igor from Bond 180. So Igor?
Yeah. Hi guys. Really delighted to be here and really keen to participate in this little surprise of unveiling for the community. That's the reason why I was kind of hanging in the background. So there's something at Bond 180. I'm part of the Bond 180 team. I'm a principal engineer. And we have been working on something in the private fixed income assets space. And we've created a way to integrate much easier with Corda-based applications from any technology. I think this is very relevant for a lot of people who actually build their Corda-based applications, because yes, Corda is great and it's a fundamental part of any decentralized application, but you still have things around it. And I'm sure that Marco Polo have invested a lot in the components which are not actually working on Corda, but sitting next to it and talking to Corda via Corda RPC. However, not everyone have 70 developers in Odessa, and moreover, not everyone have developers who know anything about Java. Whilst Corda kind of forces you to go down that way with Corda RPC. So what we imagined instead is, what if Corda offered a REST API for a Corda app? I think it would be much easier for a developer to code against that using any tool and technology they're comfortable with, including a single page application. So we are extremely delighted to let you guys know that we have just unveiled a new open source initiative that does exactly that. It's a way to add Corda to any application stack using any technology instantly. The project is called Cordaptor, and it's hosted on GitHub, and it's free to use in open source. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this little surprise is actually show you it in action. So you can see that it's super easy and it's very friendly for whatever Corda app you actually have built. So I'll try to share my screen. And hopefully you see this. So what I'm gonna, it'll take 3 minutes, so bear with me if this is too technical. What I'm gonna do is I'll use Corda example application, which is part of the Corda excellent samples repository from Corda GitHub, which all Corda developers know and love. This is the reference of how you actually do write contracts or flows. This Corda app example is just issues the IOU. So I essentially like an obligation to pay some money later on. I didn't do any modification to the Corda app, with exception of one line, which I'll talk to you later. I'll explain why it's necessary. But anyway, all I did was created a test Corda network with the code I took from the repository, and I dropped a Cordaptor bundle as a Corda app on its own right into the Corda app directory of a node. So that's all I did. It's a zero configuration root. And I've started the Corda network on my local laptop, and these are 3 nodes and a notary. And one node, the party A, has Cordaptor running on it. Cordaptor is happily saying that it's available on localhost. Because it's a REST API, what I can do is I can use Swagger, which is a very friendly tool to interact with REST APIs through the browser. And Cordaptor comes with one built in. So here is a Swagger front end for the Corda app. And every Corda developer knows and loves what exactly is in the Corda app. It's essentially a state, which is called IOU state, and a flow, which is called, well, it's called initiator for some reason, but it's how you actually initiate the issuance of an IOU. And through this interface, I can emulate requests to REST API, so I can interact with Corda node from just about any technology, or even my browser. Well, first thing I'll do, I'll just ask Node to give me some basic information about itself. So I can just pick up this endpoint, run the query, and see the node tells me that actually it represents party A and is running on localhost. Simple. The next thing I'm going to do is I ask this node to actually issue an IOU. So for this, I have a special REST API endpoint that's called, well, you see what it's called. I can ask it to send a request. I'll wait for it to complete, and I'm going to give it a pre-canned example, which all it does is issues 100 pounds, presumably of value, to another node. I'll just copy and paste it here. Having executed that, it's normally much faster, probably went to sleep. You can see that the result, which is a JSON, which is very easy to consume from just about any technology. And this particular JSON tells me that they've created a transaction, which is an IOU. And the IOU is, the transaction is signed by a number of people, and one of the results is actually the IOU state. You can see it here, which represents the 100 pounds from party A to party B. That's all it does. But now I have a transaction, and I can use another endpoint here to actually interrogate the Corda vault to obtain information about this transaction, which is exactly the one I've just requested to be created. So as you can see, I don't need to use any Corda RPC. I don't need to know any Java to do this. Obviously, someone created the Corda app, but that's about it. And I can write code in Go, in Python, in C# that consumes this open API that's dynamically generated on the fly based on what exactly is in the Corda app. For those of you who are curious, a couple of other points. The actual JSON Swagger UI works off an open API specification, which should look about like that. It's just a big JSON generated automatically, and it tells what exactly are endpoints and what you could send to those endpoints and what does it look like. All that is type safe. You can generate code from this using like hundreds of different tools for all sorts of languages. And the final point I'm going to make is this Cordaptor is a Corda app. You can deploy it into your node, and this little diagram shows you how exactly it's going to work. You have Corda core with the Corda app, and you have a Cordaptor with a web server that exposes a REST API. But the alternative way to deploy it is to run Cordaptor as a separate process that would connect to Corda using RPC and offer a caching load balancing gateway to Corda. So you can restart your node, you can upgrade your node without losing connectivity for your API clients. That's another benefit of using this as sort of in a gateway mode. I suppose that's a whistle-stop tour for the capabilities of Cordaptor. Go check it out on GitHub. The R3 guys can post a link to GitHub in chat, and we definitely would welcome any feedback or any questions about whether Cordaptor could be used for your project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us. Thank you, David, for being today with us and answering all our questions. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.